Well, let's get into the news of the day. Joining me is LNP MP Phil Thompson. Phil, thanks for your time tonight. I want to start with the government's budget update being handed down tomorrow. There's reports it's set to include up to $25 billion in additional spending. So riddle me this. I thought we wanted to try and bring inflation down. How does $25 billion of extra spending help that? Or maybe inflation's not really a priority after all, or maybe Jim Chalmers just doesn't know what he's doing.
Well, I think you're right everywhere. It's definitely not a number one factor for this government. If you look back to the election, the number one issue for this Labor government was to go to the polls for a referendum in a divisive voice. Now it's saying, oh, the number one issue has always been inflation, but we're going to spend a lot more as well. Jim Chalmers, it's clear that he's not across his brief, doesn't really know what he's up to. And we saw today that, there'll be fact checkers out showing that he's been misleading in his comments. We know that when they run out of money, they come after yours. And they are preparing for an election. They're not focused on the inflation. They are going to spend, and it's going to put Australia in a worse position.
Yeah, I love the way Jim Chalmers is communicating this, though. And I mean, not that there's a high bar for communication when it comes to the government, but he's talking about the fact that, the deficit is going to be larger than thought. He's saying there's going to be some slippage. I just love the language. Finance Minister Katie Gallagher, she's blamed the government's extra spending on the coalition. She says it's inherited spending, funding for already established programs that the coalition didn't budget. Let's take a look at what she had to say today.
There's also the continuation of the unavoidable spending that we've inherited since coming to government. So these are often ongoing programs that had a funding cliff or had no ongoing funding attached to them. And this obviously was a feature of the former government's budgeting, where they sought to reduce costs or make it look like the budget was in better shape than it actually was.
How long have the Albanese government been in power? It's like 3 years, isn't it? At what point does the government take responsibility for things?
Well, imagine they sit in the big office. When you get the big office, you get the big responsibility. And we've heard from the Labor government and Katie Gallagher and Jim Chalmers and, Wayne Swan, who's Jim's best mate, telling the Australian people that, look how good we are, we're in budget surplus. And now going into their last budget before the election, like, oh, no, it's the coalition's fault we're going into deficit. What rubbish. Take some responsibility for your budget mismanagement. And the only reason they managed to find a surplus was because of the coal industry, the gas industry, our mining and resources, our agriculture. But instead of thanking them, they want to punish them. And instead of going, we know that people are doing it tough, they want to talk about how great they are. Now, a budget surplus does not mean that your household budget is in surplus, because it's not. People are doing it tough. Now we're going to go into a Labor deficit and they want to blame the coalition? Grow up, take some responsibility.
Well, we were promised that if they came to power, we'd have adults, but instead we've got, a repetition of, do you remember on the Brady Bunch where they used to say, Marsha, Marsha, Marsha? The government's like everything Dutton, Dutton, Dutton. It's never their responsibility. I tell you, though, there's one group who will be very happy with tomorrow's budget, not householders, but the ABC. Money's tight, but money's never so tight that Labor can't find a few extra million, try 83 million over 2 years, for our ABC and SBS. The government says it's committed to showing the independence of the public broadcasters, but I'm inclined to think $83 million in a cost of living crisis shows something other than independence.
Yeah, well, we've seen a lack of independence from ABC recently. Only look at the Heston Russell case where they fabricated gunshots or rifle shots and pretty much accused him and his platoon of war criminals to be found guilty in court and to come out and pretty much just go, oh, my bad, and then have no punishments from there. I think it's horrendous. I think it's a slap in the face to democracy and the wider ADF. I don't think that they're independent. I think that the ABC specifically is left-leaning and biased and has been targeting our ADF and any sort of policy that's different to the Labor government.
I just don't understand how you can get decreasing viewers, decreasing listeners, and yet increasing funding. Tell me anywhere else in the world where that kind of equation works. Certainly doesn't work like that in the private sector. Speaking of Labor's failures to acknowledge its own mistakes or to give credit where it's due, a war of words has erupted between Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Opposition Leader Peter Dutton over nuclear power. Have a listen to what Jim Chalmers had to say this morning regarding the opposition's nuclear plan.
Our political opponents, for reasons that are unfathomable to sensible people, have gone for the version of energy which is the most expensive, would push up power bills the most, would take the longest, would deliver only a sliver of energy.
Honestly, this government has no credibility at all talking about what's expensive when it comes to energy. Peter Dutton was quick to respond.
Well, it's just comical. I mean, Jim Chalmers is like some sort of comedy routine where whatever he says, I would fact check. He refuses to release any of the detail in relation to that claim.
Phil, it seems Labor is so blinded by its green dream it won't even consider a reasonable alternative that would lower power bills, keep the lights on and reduce emissions. Jim Chalmers has really pushed the idea that next year's election will be a referendum on nuclear energy. I'm not sure it's going to be a referendum on nuclear. I think it's going to be a referendum on power bills and power reliability. And on that score, the coalition are in a very good position, don't you think?
Oh, correct. And the next election that we go to is going to be focused on cost of living and how cost of living is out of control. But if you look at what Jim Chalmers just said, he has been fact-checked before on X, on other platforms with misleading comments. He's been told he's wrong. And this just goes to show that, once again, he's not above purposely misleading. These policies that Peter Dutton and Ted O'Brien released on the nuclear costings were done independently by an independent group that is respected, that have been used by the Labor Party. And to say that if people want to explore nuclear and have that mature conversation aren't sensible, which is what Jim Chalmers just said, I think is pretty disgraceful from a treasurer that's supposed to be there for all of Australians. Instead, he's just doing whatever Wayne Swans tells him to do, just in the factional warlord games, instead of looking how he should be able to make life better for all of Australians. He won't do it. Peter Dutton will.
Well, there was a nuclear inquiry underway today with representatives from both sides of government. And I was interested to hear the Minerals Council of Australia making clear their opposition to the legislative ban on nuclear energy. The council's chief executive, Tanya Constable, told the inquiry there was no mandate for the ban, either scientifically, technologically or economically, and no evidence has been presented to justify the ban. I'm sure you would agree with that. It's ridiculous that nuclear energy is banned in this country and there won't even be a discussion contemplated by the government.
Well, imagine having experts in the room like the Resource Council that represents a vast variety of different organisations and industries coming out and saying that. We should be listening to experts. And I'll tell you one thing, mate, no good ideas come out of Canberra. No good ideas come from politicians out of Parliament House. They come from people like this, experts that live and breathe it in the industries. We should be listening to them. And the coalitionists would love for the Labor Party to put down this warlord mentality and born to rule mentality, listen to the experts, listen to the Resource Council, listen to people that are out there saying, let's have this mature conversation, because the best time to build a shade tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. We need to get on with it so power is cheaper and cost of living comes down for our future generations.
Phil Thompson, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks.